Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here out on the bench is it's one of my worm bins that I recently referred to as my nearly at capacity worm bin. For a while there I was thinking that maybe I would try to run my new systems by launching them with a fairly great amount of material in them right to begin with, instead of, only using a small portion of the available space in the bin. The whole idea was to make full use or maximum use of the available space, but I don't know. Somehow, to me, it felt a little bit like I was working against myself. Every time we'd come in here, even though it doesn't seem like it's all the way up to the rim, once I get into aerating stuff and fluffing it up, and it starts to take up more space by me aerating it, and then not only that, but me excavating holes to get down into where I'd like to add the new feeding. Just feels like I'm already stacking stuff so high up around the edges that I've almost run myself out of room. So I kind of took a departure from doing things that way to give myself a little bit more room. I'm still trying to build my new systems to better utilize more of the available space in the new systems, but still leaving myself a little bit of extra breathing room to work. So this one is still a throwback to when I really felt like I was going to try to go full bore on maximizing the use of the available space. This little piece of plastic is going to come out. Anytime I find something like that floating around in my systems, it's got to come out. It's just doesn't belong there. Not even sure how it ends up in there sometimes. Maybe because I'm using stuff like leaves. Is that even a leaf? It might be a piece of paper. Sometimes I'm assuming it's stuff that somehow got tangled up in my collection of leaves. Because I'll collect my leaves using my leaf blower. That's also a leaf vacuum. And then I'm not that particular about picking through this stuff before I end up placing it down here into the worm bins as bedding. So now it's been 11 days since our last check-in on this system. The system's now 83 days of age. And it's been fed, I believe, 7 times. This might be feeding number 8. So we'll see how we do as far as coming up to the available space in the system. I mean, the worms are gradually working the stuff in this bin down so that it takes up less space. And then we can come in with more fresh bedding once in a while. But to me, the gut feeling has most lately been to not really add too much fresh bedding and try to just give the worms a little bit of time to work down the materials that are in here already. Although this is a pretty heavily populated bin, and I do feel like they're actually burning through the material we gave them quite quickly, converting it all to castings quite fast. This is a piece of cantaloupe rind. Most of what they got last time was the rinds of some cantaloupe melon as well as some watermelon. And usually the majority of that stuff does get eaten, but the rind itself, especially the cantaloupe rind, remains as leftovers because it's a little bit tougher material that the worms need a little bit more time to work down. And I believe that's what we saw here too, another chunk of that stuff. The watermelon rind seems like it does get eaten pretty quickly. Although I wouldn't be surprised if we bumped into a little piece of that as well. That might be what we're seeing here too, a little thin, paper thin piece of stuff that looks like it could be that. So I'm gradually excavating the hole where we're going to add today's feeding. I just took that stick out too. That stick also seemed like a piece of material that might be just a little bit too big to expect to see broken down in the worm bin over the general lifespan of one of my worm bins. And some of my worm bins, usually in the past, 150 used to be my threshold for the lifespan of a bin, maybe 200 days. But lately I've been really running the systems much longer, pushing the envelope a little bit, and even now I've got systems that are now in excess of 300 days of age. Although I get this kind of funny feeling about this system here, that it's just not going to make it that far. Perhaps because of the fact that we started it out with so much stuff right from the beginning that it just feels like I might reach the capacity of the container prior to us ever getting anywhere near that age in this bin. And it also helps that I think we've got a pretty good sized population in here. I think I flashed the number on the screen last time because I verbally misrepresented the estimated worm count in here. I believe I might have said something along the lines of 2,600, but I believe the real number that we all came up with together was something closer to 3,000, maybe 2,961 for some reason. I did watch the video from last time briefly just to refresh my memory on how things looked in here last time, and I think that's the number that we came up with. And that's always, you know, the starting population from when the bin was originally launched. What happens from that point forward, I usually assume it consists to a large degree of worms reproducing, increasing their numbers. And you know, I can't shake the feeling that giving them more bedding would be a good idea. I don't know why, but it does feel like they're really going through the material we've given them. Even though it's only been maybe a little bit under 3 months, 84 days, 83 days, it does seem like the concentration of castings in here is quite high. So I'm just reaching behind me to grab my container off the shelf that's got my prepared bedding in it. So we might not go too overboard, but we are going to give them at least a handful. See how that looks. Maybe give them 2 handfuls of some of this prepared bedding here. It's just shredded paper and cardboard, and then I mix in a good number of little bits of dry leaves, but then I dampen the whole collection here to make it nice and soft so that once the worms get access to it, they're really comfortable with just climbing into it and using it as bedding. And you know what? What had been our feeding zone indicator, this old coffee filter, was really getting chewed up quite badly, and I've got a replacement right here that we can swap that out with. So I'm pulling that out as well so we can replace that too. And then these old pieces of leftover cantaloupe rinds, we'll drop those in before we add today's feeding. Today's feeding is going to consist of what you see here. It's the leaves of some radishes, and this is half of a roll that started turning a little bit moldy. You can even see some of the white mold growing there on the edge of it. So I sliced it up to make it easy for the worms to gain access to it. But I've often found that if I put bread in without dampening it thoroughly, it just kind of sits there and doesn't go anywhere. But I've also noticed, on the other hand, is that if I dampen the bread considerably when I place it into the worm bin, then the worms can really rip right into it and start chewing on the stuff. So it really does make quite a difference as to how the bread gets introduced into the worm bin in terms of how moist it is or how dry it is. And you know, before we drop in all those leaves, I've also got a little bit of coffee. My coffee is starting to pile up. I haven't fed coffee to my worm bins in a few days, so I figured I would try to get rid of at least half of what's in this little container here. I think we've succeeded in doing that. And I've also got my pulverized eggshell here, which we're going to throw in here as a little bit of a grit supplement for them too. And then we can give them their nice, delicious collection of leaves. Radish leaves. Radishes, I don't know, sometimes you can find them loose and they sell them as, you know, not being part of a bunch, but mostly you end up buying them as a bunch. And then there's a lot of times a little rubber band holding things together. There it is. Another thing that I usually try to take care of removing before I put it in the worm bins is the extraction of the little rubber band held to, you know, used to hold the bunch together. And I thought I had removed it already, but sometimes it kind of hides from you and then you only find it later. And if I hadn't done so, I could have easily just pulled it out later after the worms had eaten all the food around it, and then that would just stay in here as something that the worms are unable to process. but I always prefer to try to not even put stuff into the worm bin that I know is not going to break down. So out comes the rubber band as well. And that is what makes up their feeding today. So now I've also got some stuff that I ended up piling up over here, which was stuff that had been sitting out on the surface. I thought that maybe some of that dry material that I scraped off the top surface could also go down into the feeding area to help it get caught up with the rest of the stuff in the bin. But that right there to me seems like a pretty nice feeding that the worms should definitely appreciate. So another thing I'll often do is quickly try to at least make sure that things on the outreaches of the bin are doing okay, furthest away from where I've been adding feedings. Because sometimes I just forget to do that. Sometimes I'll even go multiple feedings before I actually get down into checking the outer edges of a system. And luckily things in here look quite nice. I think I might have even commented along the lines last time in the last video about how I was thinking that the material in this bin is just so nice in terms of being quite damp and comfortable, which the worms probably appreciate, but not so much that it starts to become muddy or clumpy. It seems to be right at that perfect tipping point where if we were to allow it to get any more damp, it could easily start becoming muddy and nasty. And then by becoming that way, I think it becomes very limiting for the worms in terms of how much of the material they can kind of crawl through and make use of and gain access to break it all down. I think that's probably one of the main reasons I don't like seeing stuff get all muddy and nasty, because it just feels to me like now the worms are, severely limited on the material that they're able to explore by only being able to crawl in between the chunks of stuff that has clumped up and gotten nasty. So that's our check-in here. The only stuff remaining to do here is to bring in this nice new replacement feeding zone indicator, which I usually just position right over where we last fed. And then back on come the coverings. Last time too we had replaced plastic coverings with the with this paper/cardboard combination, which I believe allows for a little bit more airflow, resulting in a little bit more dry material on the top surface, but not a lot, as you saw. And then it also, most importantly, prevents things from being able to get too muddy and nasty. So that's our check-in with our now 83-day-old red wiggler worm bin getting feeding number 8, was it? Or maybe 9? I'm not even certain. Maybe I'll include that in the description. But that's it, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.